Hi, how you doing? So, I want to talk about the forgotten art of learning to learn today, and especially with the tech progression and everything. Learning anything new has gotten so out of touch to us, and it feels almost foreign. Like every passing day, I feel like this inspiration came from one of the videos that I remembered watching. I don't know how long ago, but it was about this guy sitting in his room and learning how to play the guitar or something through YouTube. And he was talking about how you can learn anything from your room from YouTube these days. And he had learned like four other skills sitting in his room just through YouTube. The video blew up like downright. It had millions of likes. And that is so fascinating that, oh, we just forgot one day that we can learn anything from YouTube. And now this guy is just doing it. And now we all are just fascinated by that. So I found this one Substack article to begin with. The start of learning anything new. Tom Burchard. He's talking about how the Dunning-Kruger effect comes into play every time you start something new. The Dunning-Kruger effect formed by these two psychologists, Dunning and Kruger, obviously. It was a cognitive bias that a person's lack of knowledge and skill in a certain area causes them to overestimate their own competence. Like, the dumber I am, the more I think that I'm better than I am. He's talking about how starting anything new leads to this Dunning-Kruger effect in a way that start out with thinking, I can just do that because I know how to do that anyways. That is the peak of Mount Stupid. And then there's a valley of despair when the confidence dips and you realize that your competence is not really matching the status that you've given yourself. And then there's a slope of enlightenment and plateau of stability. And yeah, there are other factors that come into play with tech progression. Obviously, there's being lazy and sheer misuse of tech, especially AI, with everything. People are doing their college assignments purely through AI. And like, what's the point of college then? I will put a pin in this right now because I will get back to other people questioning institutional practices that are made for us to be learning new things, but it's not really working the right way. Next point is that it's not the same as when we switch from physical media and books to screens and Google, because it's always different. And this was inspired by the argument that B.F. Skinner made in his book Beyond Freedom and Dignity, that was based on new tech frightens humans every time, because this is how we also reacted when we switched from books to Googling stuff. It was just the people who were critical towards that practice suffered from that. This entire idea was argued by Noam Chomsky against it, because he said that human beings are not just reactive and predictable machines entirely shaped by their environment and like conditioning and everything, but they have their own authority over themselves, and like the processes that involve in us learning anything are more complex than he is making them out to be. But also, it's my responsibility to remind the internet that Noam Chomsky was in the Epstein files, so do of that what you will. And I found on the paper talked about escaping Skinner's box, AI in the new era of techno superstition, compared us using AI to the pigeons in a Skinner's box. To give you some context, Skinner conducted this one experiment in the late 1940s in which there were some hungry pigeons that he put in a box, and he fed them at random intervals, and they don't know how that's happening, but they kind of created rituals and like ran around, flapped their wings, etc., to account for this might be what's causing us to get the food. And then they, even if it didn't work, they just kept on doing that, as in like they just kept on assuming that they have control over something that they did not have control over at all. And he's comparing that in a form of techno superstition, that we think that we have more control over AI than we actually do. And in this blog, they've mentioned that we have two choices. One, we can tinker with what's presented to us inside the box. That is, we can add more bells and whistles to our algorithms, more levers and switches. This will either give humans genuine understanding and control over the systems, or the illusion of understanding and control. The problem with that is that the trade-offs or compromises in the system's efficacy and the greater insults to the agency of the humans working inside the box. Second, the alternative to this would be that we can stop flapping our wings and get out of the box altogether. Leave the machines to do what they are best at while we do something else. Clearly, this person thinks that we should leave the machines to do what they're best at. Okay, so to not get any more distracted from the topic than we've already done, coming back, building habits and the comfort of a routine actually leads to stagnation which might lead to illness. And I found this out through this one podcast I was listening to. That was Diary of a CEO podcast, and it was the one episode with Luisa Nicola, who is an Alzheimer's expert. They were talking about because your brain stops developing at the age of 25 to 30 years. After that, whatever lifestyle habits you actually adopt and you actually follow every single day is what leads to diseases like Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, dementia, and a lot of other problems in later life. The main core of that podcast was that, at least for the first hour, because that's all I heard, was that stagnation is illness, because once you get stagnant, you will become ill. The next point was academic learning and self-image. This is something actually I've learned the hard way because I was sitting a very important set of exams last year. I came across this one Instagram reel in which they talked about you only think that you can't do something when you dissociate it from what the normal is for you. Let me break that down. Now, I think that I can't crack these said exams because this is not normal for me. Like, I ever sat any hard exams because I'm just too scared of them. And I don't think that I'm capable of cracking them. This is not the normal for me. Studying 10 hours a day is not normal for me. So it's a big deal. It's like creating this big deal in my head. It's what's stopping me from accomplishing what I can probably just accomplish by accepting that this is normal for me. Which is also why the smart kids are more likely to get better grades in school, because that's the normal for them. They can just study and they can just do that because they've been labeled smart anyways. It's just easier. And I found this paper that also talked about this. It's called Self-Concept and Learning, the Revised Inventory of Learning Processes by Schmeck, Bernstein and Cersei from 2010. They're talking about a lot of interesting things, including types of processing during learning, which causes the processing to be how it is. Another important point they mentioned was that the smooth flow of cognition and thus integration and versatility with regard to functions is limited by one's self-concept, which includes one's intrinsic motivation, self-efficacy, a reluctance to blindly memorize the words of authority figures, and self-esteem. This is exactly what I'm talking about, that the smart kid is more likely to get the higher grades because that is their normal. The role of labels and self-perception is more important in our lives than we think. Anyway, so I've been learning how to skate lately, which is extremely random for me. I'm learning how to inline roller skate now, and I'm really bad at balancing myself as it is without roller skates. So this is extremely new for me, but it's also what makes it interesting. Okay, so I want to jump into the process of learning to learn, and I found this very, very graph and table heavy paper, which I love. It's called Learning to Learn by Worth and Perkins, and they've discussed everything to begin with. Like, in the beginning of the paper, there's a meme there to keep your attention. So they start out by questioning the institutional practices. This is exactly where we put a pin in, I think 5 minutes ago. Then this one image, it's talking about critical thinking. So they're mentioning Bloom's levels of thinking from lowest to highest, and it goes from knowledge, comprehension, application, analysis, synthesis, and evaluation, because that is how we learn, basically. And this is also like how they broke down what critical thinking actually means, because they said it's a process of conceptualizing, applying, analyzing, synthesizing, and or evaluating information gathered from or generated by observation, experience, reflection, reasoning, or communication as a guide to belief and action. And they did this one research in here too. They talked about that they asked college students what critical thinking actually is, which is really interesting because in college, at least in my college, they do this too. They emphasize critical thinking so much. This word comes up so often, it's almost frustrating because we have no idea what that means. And they did this one study asking students what that means, and like half of the people just actually did not know what that means. So now they've made this paper to explain to people how learning actually works. They also talked about cognitive psychology tells us that learning is constructive and not a repetitive process. This is also touching on theories of Piaget, although they've mentioned that Glasser from 1991 talked about this, and they've mentioned that understanding comes through experiences and interaction with the environment, and that the learner uses a foundation of previous knowledge to construct new knowledge and understanding. And consequently, the learner has primary responsibility for constructing knowledge and understanding, not the teacher. In a constructive classroom, the teacher is no longer the authority, but instead a guide or facilitator who assists student in learning. This is exactly what Piaget also talked talked about in the context of how children growing up construct their own environment and their own like actions. So they are the authority figures in their own lives and not the parents or the people guiding them to do what they're doing. Next, they talk about what learning actually is through this one image. This is Kolb's learning cycle basically, and how it goes from, oh, something happens to you, that is your experience, and then you reflect on it in a way that you compare it to something that's happened to you before, and then there's conceptualization and you think about it, like you let that sit in, you absorb it, and then you do something about it, which is the active experimentation, and then it goes on. That is like the cycle of learning. Like, we've never even thought about this. We learn things all the time. Another thing they talked about is learning styles and elements. To each their own, I would say. Personally, I'm a visual learner, and they talked about 5 types of learning styles: sensory, visual, inductive, active, and sequential. I will not get into that. Okay, so this entire paper, basically to summarize, talked about intellectual development, critical thinking, metacognition, and understanding grades, and how all that impacts our learning, our will to learn, and also our institutional practices that actually hinder the way that we actually learn rather than fostering it. Okay, so now we jump into the evolution bit, how learning has evolved. It's the principle of learning to learn. I found this another paper. It's called Towards Learning to Learn. Who knew? I'm so on topic today. It's by Lansell and Gording from 2019, and they're talking about learning to learn makes learning better, and how they're basically associated with AI, cognitive science, and neuroscience, and how cognitive science and AI were always kind of related, and neuroscience and AI, how we attempted to form AI frameworks inspired by our understanding of the human brain to mimic it as much as we can, although we know very little about the human brain, so we can't really do that exactly, but that is what they're working towards. Another thing we can focus on while we notice the evolution of learning to learn is how we learn as children and as adults, and how that's actually different. I found another research paper on the skills that are acquired by children versus adults. Surprisingly, a mixed research on this. Like, we still kind of don't know how and when is like it's better to acquire skills. But this one study talks about it by Janicek, Fisher, and Nemeth. It's called The Best Time to Acquire New Skills. And they had a big sample size, so I trust these guys. And he talked about how sensitivity to raw probabilities and therefore acquiring new skills is significantly more effective until early adolescence than later in life because of the brain plasticity and the development of the brain until 25 to 30 years old. The next time we talk about brain plasticity actually, and the importance of learning to learn. Why are we making this video? Why are we talking about this forgotten art if it has been forgotten? I found this one Nature article. It's called To Learn Something New, Do Something New by Miller and Franklin. I'm a fan, and they talk about this one research study they did on rats. They switched strategies when they were like made to follow this one path differently. But what they concluded from that was that a novel experience can weaken old connections within the brain memory system, thereby freeing up resources to learn something new. That's what they observed from the study, which is wow. You can just do something that's new and then your brain would be freed up to actually learn more new things. Coming back to the learning to learn paper that I talked about before, which had a lot of tables and graphs if you remember, they also included a section talking about the brain implications to learning to learn, and they said that the key findings include learning changes physical structure of the brain. Second, learning organizes and reorganizes the brain. Third, different parts of the brain may be ready to learn in different stages of development, nothing we have not heard about before. During development, the wiring of the brain is created through the formation of synapses, which are junctions between neurons through which the information passes. At birth, the human brain contains all the neurons it will ever have, but has relatively small portion of the large number of synapses that it will develop. New synaptic connections are added to the brain after birth in 2 ways. One, overproduction and loss. That is by pruning, that we have a lot more synapses when we're young because it gets pruned or it gets removed. The second, synapse addition or experience, that you're experiencing more things, you're learning new more things because brain is a muscle, brain is plastic. Breakdown, the doom, the horrors, the ultimate takeaway of this video. I found this one Reddit thread. It talks about like how they spent the past year learning how to learn in a way that, the school never taught me how to learn things, it just asked me what I learned. They broke down everything. They broke down how memory actually works. It's sensory memory, short-term memory, and long-term memory. There are myths to intelligence that people just consider it as a fixed trait and label themselves and then don't learn much. That one's memory or learning abilities cannot be improved, and taking breaks during learning or studying is a waste of time. And they talked about techniques like recall, repetition, mnemonics, etc., and lifestyle changes that people can adopt in their lives, like exercising, a good diet, sleep, basic things. The goal is to build lore at the end of the day and always have a silly party trick up your sleeve. And a very important AI free article that I found from 2017 says it all. Literally on natalieleeson.com. I love this woman. I don't know who this is, but they talked about 11 benefits to learning something new. The first one is fun. What on earth learn something if it's not fun? Second is a sense of accomplishment and pride. The most important ones, in their opinion, are the brain chemistry changes, you stave off dementia, learning something new will make you happier, and that's it. That's all I have for you today. Of course, this is where I end my video because this is how it's ought to be. This is the way God intended it to be. And thank you so much for sticking around and still watching me yap. Anyways, I will see you later. Bye bye.